Hello and welcome to another watercolour exercise. This time a couple of large river red gum on the side of a waterway up in the northern country, the high country in Victoria. This doesn't come from any specific reference, mainly just out of my head. I like painting trees along these waterways. They've got such a lot of character about them. Now this initial wash I'm putting on here is some ultramarine blue, a little bit of cobalt, and a little bit of phthalo blue in the mix, and so on, just to give it a bit of a kick along. Phthalo's very vibrant colour and so on, and can tend to dominate if it's not used sparingly. But I wouldn't discourage you from using it, because the end results are quite striking. The paper I'm using is 300 gram cold press, Saunders Waterford. And the brush you see in here is a size 20 Escoda Perla. Wonderful brush. Again, I'm just cutting around the main shapes and so on, and we'll let those dry before we do anything too spectacular in that area. There won't be a large change in the sky here, because trying to make the foreground main players, the trees, dominant, so the sky doesn't necessarily form too much of a part, other than just quite a clear, crisp background. There's lovely frosty days as you get in the high country. Mix for the water area here is the same as the sky, and the first brush stroke was intended to have that dry brush effect, for the intention of a bit of reflection on the water, and I won't touch that again. We'll damp out a little bit of the area in the background, just to suggest it might be a hill or two, or a mountain. There might even be a bit of snow on one of the peaks up in there and so on, but it's not something which needs to be a terribly strong image. Again, I want the trees to be the main players, and nothing to move away from their influence on the composition. A little bit of raw sienna, just to warm the base area, the ground area up, with a tiny touch of red oxide. Not quite as strong as burnt sienna, but good addition to the palette. Here we've just got a darkened grey as these areas on the other side of the waterway. Ultramarine blue, a little bit of neutral tint and so on, just to suggest that there's something over there. The underpainting of the trees is, I usually put a bit of a light grey into some sections of where the bark is going to be, and there'll be a few spots of white paper and so on showing through those. Tree on the right hand side will have a wash which is tending more towards the light blue, when the one on the left hand side has got just a slight green tint to it. Not for any particular reason, other than just to preserving interest in the composition. I like these tree compositions to work with each other if they can, and by placing the branch which dissects the left-hand side tree in the middle, and therefore breaking up that very strong vertical, I find that helps me make a cohesive composition. Hopefully So we don't have to think too much more about balance after that. And just get on with making the trunks of what I'm doing here to be the main part of my painting. A little bit of shadow to anchor the trees down to the ground around them. So we start to give the trees a little bit of character. Using a smaller Escoda brush now, a size 6, synthetic. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, just the same. It's a staple mixture on my palette. Varying degrees of warmth and darkness and coolness, depending on the ratio of each of the colours that are being used. Come back over this with a wet brush. Just break that hard edge down a bit. It also gives me the feeling of the roundness of the trunk. I like to have a good mixture of the shape of the broken pieces of bark and so on the trunk of the tree. I inject a lot of character into the trunk. The idea, of course, is not to overdo them, as with any of your painting. What we're doing is suggesting that there are darker areas of bark growing on the tree, and so on. We don't have to paint every one. They don't have to be, they certainly wouldn't be symmetrical. And again, we come back here with a dampened brush and just soften some of those edges. So we don't want them too hard. We want them to be dynamic and forceful in the painting, but we don't want them to be too harsh. Tiny touch of violet in the wash here. Again, not too strong. Taking a little bit of this wash out with a damp brush here, just to come back to the paper, just to give that nice softened area of the bark. Again, there's no format for what I'm doing here. It's largely a case of what you observe. And what you want your painting to say. Again, we just reinforce some of these darker areas with application of a bit of clean paint, and then just knock them back a little bit with some clean water. See, we've added some shadows from the right-hand tree casting out onto the shadow on the tree on the left-hand side, and we'll just bring in a few wispy sort of scrubby sticks growing out of the side of the tree. The shadow is an important part of linking the two of them together, obviously, for sharing that sense of space. Just to warm up the foreground a little further, just to break up the area we've already put on. You can see we've used a little bit of spatter here and there, just to add to that texture. And our trees are starting to almost getting to the completed stage at this point. Just break up a little bit of the ground mass underneath them. Again, trying to anchor the eye in the foreground, making that the most important part of what we're doing. The trees are the main players, and we don't want to steal their spotlight by creating areas of interest other than the trees themselves. Just warmed up a little bit of this foreground slightly, and we'll introduce a little bit of stronger shadow. This has been a good exercise and most enjoyable. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.